So yeah, this is just kind of carrying on from that last video a bit. So, you know, all these people that are like supposedly Christians, you know, here in the UK, not so many people go to church, but I know you in the US, you've got the Bible Belt, you know, and there's all these like people that call themselves Christians and that, and take it all quite seriously. And I'm just thinking, you know, it just, I don't think Christ would recognize these people as Christians. They're more like it's like I've got this idea of like devils walking around telling themselves that they're angels, you know. That's what it seems like to me. So yeah, just briefly, I already covered this in the last video about how and I talk about this a lot in my videos, how like cannabis cures cancer and it's illegal. Christ healed people on the Sabbath, which was also illegal, right? And I think these things are quite related, you know, to be like a proper Christian, you've got to heal people. And if cannabis is curing cancer and it's not being used in most places, there's something wrong. And the people that are Christians should be doing something about that, just like Christ healed people on the Sabbath, you know, even though it was against the law. Also, you know, the Book of Enoch, you know, I didn't mention this so much in the last video, but the Book of Enoch, where it specifically says humans are not supposed to have the written word. Like, you've got the Book of Jude in the Bible, and that quotes from the Book of Enoch. So obviously, the Book of Enoch is scripture. You know, it's written as scripture. But yet, the Bible has got all these so-called books, which are just letters, especially like the Pauline stuff, the stuff from Paul. They're letters. They're not even written as scripture, and yet they're included as if they were scripture. And then you've got the Book of Enoch, which is not included, which was clearly written as scripture. But you've got a reference to it in the Book of Jude, you know, who also right at the beginning sort of like more or less apologizes for using the written word, as if, you know, it's obvious that people don't use the written word much, you know. If they want to like them, people in those days must have known that the written word was like a bad thing, which is a good reason why Christ didn't write his own scripture, you know, because people shunned, you know, the righteous people shunned the written word. And quite likely why the Prophet Muhammad also was known to, or was believed to not read and write. And so there was a much deeper suspicion of reading and writing, which has basically evaporated without the Book of Enoch being included in the Bible. People not knowing about it, really, they don't really know this. I've tried talking to people that think of themselves as Christians about things like the Book of Enoch, and they just, I can just tell that they expect to be told what to do. They're not thinking for themselves. They're not. Oh dear. You know, they just like their ignorance. It's like there's a tradition. What it is, I think it's like a tradition that people have called them, that people's ancestors have called themselves Christians, you know, and it's sold to us through the media, like in films, the old films, you know, how so many people used to be Christian and take it all seriously, and it's like, so people like the idea of calling themselves Christians and going to church as if that's what makes them a Christian. But what they don't do is actually behave like a real Christian ought to. you know, to sort of follow the actual example of Christ, you know, talk about the money lenders and the banking system, like stealing everyone's money, you know, or being like taking the example of the Good Samaritan and doing something about the school system that is causing like irreversible trauma for all these people, and doing something about the cannabis thing, you know, talking about cannabis, the school system, the banks, and the written word. You know, these things are pretty obvious, right? This is what I think, that these things are so obvious. In fact, they're so staring you in the face. It's the wonder is why is all these millions and millions of people that call themselves Christians, why don't they notice this? How come they've got this book of history and it tells them all these things in there, and yet they're just, you know, for years now, like for 70 years, cannabis has been illegal, and people knew then it cured cancer. We've known for 170 years that it cures cancer. So how are we allowing this? How are these people calling themselves Christians? And when they're like the people that cross over the road from the beaten up guy that the Good Samaritan's supposed to save, you know? Why aren't they acting like the Good Samaritan? Why aren't they doing something about all these like people dying of cancer, you know? And the banking system, why aren't they talking about the banking system that's stealing everyone's money, and the medical establishment which is poisoning people instead of giving them the cure? You know, and the law, the system of law, it's all like, you know, these are the principalities that we have to fight. This is where the real enemy is, you know. All this centralized power, you know, getting everybody deceived by the written word, you know. Yeah. So the question is, if people have got the answer right, it's staring them in the face, how is it that they're not even seeing it? And how is it they don't talk about this stuff? You know, in relation to Christianity. I mean, surely that's what a good Christian does. You behave like Christ. You try to emulate, you know, the life of Christ as much as you can. So if you've got the banking system is ripping everyone off, you have to point it out. You have to talk about it. You know, you have to try and get something done about it. That's what a Christian should be doing, right? And I don't see them doing it at all. The same with the cannabis thing, you know. If it cures cancer and it's natural, it's God gave us every herb yielding seed. For us, it shall be for food. Let your food be your medicine, you know. So why aren't all the Christians up in arms about it, all getting together? I mean, Christ was one person, right? You've got all these Christians that are supposed to be being like Christ. There's millions of them, hundreds of millions of them. They could easily demand that these laws get, you know, the people who've made these laws get all their money taken away. The people that have been profiting from these laws have all their money taken away and get locked up. They should be punished for what they're doing, right? You people that call yourselves Christians seem like just total hypocrites. You know, you're like devils walking around telling yourselves that you're angels and patting each other on the back, and you know, well, you're just devils. You're filthy. And it's interesting because it's actually straightforward. You know, it's one of the things about doing the work. I've found that it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy to do the work. You know, you just have to live in the truth and deal with it, right? It's quite easy. You don't have to do a great deal. You're not necessarily going to get crucified. I mean, there's so many people that can be Christians that have got the opportunity, and you know, we don't crucify people nowadays. You know, look what happened to Rick Simpson when he was giving out cannabis in Canada. They took him to court, but they wouldn't put him in prison because they realised that he was basically an exemplar of Christ. You know, that's what he is. He was just healing people. He ignored the laws so that he could heal people. So he's just like Christ. That's what Christ done. You know, how can they put him in prison? They claim to be like a Christian country, more or less. You know. So yeah, but I mean, part of doing the work, it's about talking about these things. You know, you don't have to call yourself a Christian, but you can at least call these Christians out on their hypocrisy. You know, point out what they're total hypocrites. You know, and also ask the question, why? What's keeping these people so ignorant? Why are they sort of so blind to the truth and deaf to it? You know, when it's so straightforward. I mean, how is it there's so many of them that have got these books, these Bibles? There's so many Bibles. There's like, I'm sure there's billions of Bibles in the world. You know, and these stories are pretty straightforward. They're pretty easy to understand. You know, the Good Samaritan story, the Jesus turning over the tables of the moneylenders, you know, healing people on the Sabbath day, you know, they're pretty easy to understand. So when you look at what's going on in the world, you see all this stuff going on. It's pretty obvious what Christ would have done, isn't it? So all these Christians, it's like, how are they so like unchristian? How it's like they're devils walking around like telling themselves they're angels. That's what they're doing. Dear. I often think to myself that what these people are doing, they're so frightened of the truth and reality. It's like they're like children, and they're frightened of like this imaginary monster under the bed. They're like, you know, like sheep. They all have to herd together and copy each other. It's funny that because you know, in Christianity there's this theme of the Good Shepherd as well, you know, and which kind of like, that's how people think of as Christ, you know, the shepherd, or you know, and so therefore they become sheep, you know, which is kind of a bit unfortunate, because then they start behaving like sheep, and it's kind of it's the whole point of the religion seems to be self-defeating. If you've got this sort of concept of sheep, what sort of sheep are going to overturn the tables of the moneylenders, you know? Or break the law to sort of like heal people, you know? Because you know, these Christian people, like the people that call themselves Christian, they don't want to break any laws. They don't consider that to be Christian, but that's what Christ did. I mean, do you think it was lawful for him to go and overturn the tables of the moneylenders, right? Because that's probably what the main reason why he got crucified. You know, it wasn't for healing on the Sabbath day, even though that, you know, if that had anything to do with the way things are nowadays, you know, and if they don't like you giving out cannabis to people to heal them, even if it cures their cancer, it's like, it's just not the done thing, is it? You know. Dear. So yeah, so part of doing the work, and why I talk about this stuff, is it's so, to me, it's fascinating. You have to look at it, and this is why I look at it in terms of the Matrix films, how these people can turn into Agent Smith, because they're so incredibly ignorant. You know, they're literally not there. There's no one there. There's not an actual person there. They're empty vessels. They have to be empty vessels. Because it's so obvious, you know. And if you try talking to them about it, it's just like they've got this blank look, where it's just that they can't deal with reality at all. You know, this is all like just too impossible for them to sort of face reality. Dear. And it's funny because they go around. I'm thinking of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They go around telling people they're supposed to read this book all the time, but somehow, what is it that's making these people so utterly blind to what's going on right in front of them? They can't see what's right in front of their face. You know. So these are the sort of things I like to think about, and like the questions I like to ask. You know. like for example, all these Christians, right? All their sort of the people that run all these different churches. How have they managed to all get it wrong? Why don't they? If they're all Christians, why don't they just all get together and say, look, we need to sort out the banking system, the cannabis laws, and the medical establishment, the school system. We need to stop the written word being like attached to everything, so people can live without the written word if they want to, you know. Yeah, I mean, that if I had any control over Christianity, that's what I would do. It'd be the right thing to do, you know. It'd be the Christian thing to do, wouldn't it? Yeah, dear. So yeah, we kind of try we try these sort of things, you know. We can try talking to these people, but it's like talking to a sheep. It's like you're going to get as much sense and as much of a reaction out of you would from an actual sheep. It was just like talking to a sheep, really. It's that pointless, because it's like if they can't already see it, what's going on, what's the point of telling them what's going on if their eyes aren't working? You know, this is like that. It's interesting. There's that Plato's parable of the cave. Was it a parable? I forgot what it's called now. The story about the cave. The people, you know, like most people are in this cave and they're seeing this projected light show on the wall, and they think that's reality. But one day, this guy gets up and he certainly explores the cave that they're in and finds a way out, and he finds a way out into the real world, you know. And he goes back to try and tell these people, but they won't believe him, and they won't even follow him out to sort of say, they won't even be shown the way out of the cave, you know. So they're just living this total lie, a deception. And when you try to show them the real truth, the real reality, they won't believe you, and they hate you for sort of like, you know, even telling them that. Ah, dear. So this is the sort of like, you know, this might seem depressing stuff for some of you, and that's probably why a lot of people don't do the work. But I'm just pointing out that it's actually straightforward to do the work. It's not hard, you know. A child could do it, you know. Basically, a child can see all this stuff and understand what's happening. That all these people are basically blind. They've made themselves blind and deaf. They're just totally and utterly deceived about things, and you have to wonder why. I mean, I can't really explain it. I don't know why these people are so resistant to the truth, because it's not like, and why they're so obsessed, you know, with calling themselves after this person that stood for the truth, right? And yet they won't stand for the truth, but they want to pretend like they are. It's like they're like, you know, you could like wolves in sheep's clothing or something, you know. Or devils that are dressed in like they've got little halos and stuff, and I don't know, you know. People that cover themselves with perfume but they never wash, you know. So the interesting thing, the point of this video, because I don't see any point in like trying to get through to these people, like these Christians, so-called Christians, and get them to snap out of their madness or their like this self-deception. I don't really think that's possible. You know, it's like how Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud said, most people would rather die than take a good look at themselves. And I think it's the same for the majority of people, regardless of whether they're Christians. It's the same thing. They're so totally, their consciousness is totally shut down. It's like it's switched off. You know, it's like they've got this, like, people have talked about this for years. It's like they're blinkered. They can only see this sort of like tunnel vision version of reality. You know, see only the little things that they're sort of conditioned to see. You know, they just can't see what's going on around them. They're in the left brain, and it's like looking at things through with a candle light. You know, where you just can't see any distance. You can only see very close to where the candle is. Whereas the right brain, it's like switching the light on. It's like the difference between day and night, basically, the left and right brain. And that's why you need to have both of them. You need to be able to switch from one to the other, you know. So that's also part of doing the work. So you can see from this that the vast majority of people are just purely in their left brain. Their active consciousness, their daytime consciousness is like fixated in the left brain, you know, or the brain stem, and it's got this this tunnel vision way of looking at things. You know, it's like using a candle to gauge everything in reality, because they're in the dark. They're in the dark, you know, and to get the right brain working, that's like switching the light on. That's like making it daytime, you know. And they're being conditioned to not do that. You know, this is like part of the written word. The written word tends to anchor you in the left brain. You know, if you've got a written word education, which is what everyone's getting at the moment, it anchors you in your left brain. So you're in ignorance and darkness. It's sort of like the opposite of what people expect from the written word. You know, people expect that the written word, the natural inclination to what you expect from the written word is it's going to make you more aware, you know, and have more knowledge and more awareness. But most often it has the opposite effect. You gain some knowledge, but at the expense of your right brain, your intuition, you know. So suddenly you can see with a candle, but you can't see, like, you know, you become. It's also how it connects with being like a vampire. One of the Dracula films I saw, he had this library. I know it was a book. I think it was a book. Yeah, Count Dracula. He had this library, you know, hidden library that he was obsessed with, you know. Yeah, so I think that's what a lot of that's what it is once you get the teachings down in a book, it's like they stop working. It's like stuffing. It's like killing an animal and stuffing it. It's like becomes, instead of being a living animal, it's now a dead animal, and it's like a stuffed animal. It just doesn't work anymore. Even though the teachings are there, a child could understand them. There's all these, you know, hundreds of millions of Christians, and none of them are acting like Christians. None of them are acting like Christ. So I find this quite interesting. It makes me think that the written word is like a virus. It's like a virus. It's like one of those viruses that keeps changing. You know, is it? They call it is it mutating? You know, self-mutating virus or something, you know, that just people don't realize it. They don't see it for what it is. Once you start using the written word, it takes over the way you think. It changes the way you think. They're like programs, you know, like computer programs for your brain. Right? A book is like a computer program for your brain, and a lot of these programs are going to contain viruses. And if you don't know, like, for example, like the Book of Enoch, it very clearly states that we're not supposed to have the written word. You could so much more easily, like, it's like not having a firewall in place on your computer, you know, and not having any antivirus protection. You're just going to be like sucked along with it all. Even when I've seen videos on people that talk about the Book of Enoch, but I haven't found anybody talking about the fact that it clearly states that we're not supposed to have the written word. It's as though people don't know how to get their head around it. If it's in a book, that's the written word. So it must be okay to have the written word. If all this, if it's in, if you know, isn't it? Well, Socrates, who's the grandfather of philosophy, he didn't write anything down. He was totally against the written word, and it was only Plato, who was his disciple, his student, that wrote stuff down so that it would get passed on. So we know from Plato's writings that Socrates was totally against the written word. We know that Christ apparently didn't write anything down in terms of a scripture. And if we were supposed to have the written word, why wouldn't he have done that? If he's the Son of God, he should have written a scripture for us, wouldn't he? Again, I don't think the Buddha wrote anything down, and people wrote stuff that the Buddha said down. And Muhammad, again, the Prophet Muhammad, he didn't write anything down himself. It was, everyone remembered it, and then it was written down later. Just excuse me a moment. So I've been thinking about this. I do mention it quite a lot in my videos. Well, I'm thinking about this for a long time now. My dad talked about it. When I was a child. This is one of the things my dad used to talk about. Not in the same detail that I'm going on about it, but he had this idea that people in Britain didn't like when the Christians came over with the Bible. They didn't really like it. Most people didn't like the idea. They didn't trust it. Because basically Christianity just got forced onto people. There was no real agreement. You didn't really have a choice. So that's another thing to understand about it. This has been foisted onto us. It's not like people in the past all thought, this seems like a much better religion than the one that we've got. That's not how it went at all. It wasn't like a choice. People were bullied and coerced into accepting Christianity, and there really wasn't any other options, and it got to the point where if you didn't accept Christianity, they would just call you a witch and burn you at the stake, really. But that's how everybody became in Europe became Christian, and that's how it spread. It's kind of quite an evil religion if you think about it, because although it's got all these stories, about the Good Samaritan and Christ healing people on the Sabbath and turning over the tables of the moneylenders, you got all these people with these books and they call themselves Christians, but they're allowing all this stuff. This is exactly the same stuff that Christ was like adamant against. He fought against it. That's why he was the Christ. And all they want to do now is eat chocolate eggs in remembrance of when he died, his death, or eat turkey when he was in remembrance of when he was born, and give presents to each other and stuff. Oh dear. I mean, it's a total travesty, isn't it, really? It's just a total travesty of the guy's teachings, It's like it wasn't good enough that they crucified him physically on the cross. but they've now crucified him spiritually by putting all his teachings in a book and then misdirecting people and training them to be sheep, but to call themselves Christians, you know. These are the people that police the matrix, you know. They're so incredibly ignorant that they're dangerous, you know. Their ignorance is like a weapon. It's like a blunt instrument that they constantly bash people with, you know. Still, I suppose, I mean, I could look at this video as like an instruction video about how to be a real Christian. Because the ironic thing is, right, if you behave like a real Christian, people that call themselves Christians aren't going to recognize you, and they're going to shun you, you know. They're not going to support you or be happy, you know. I've noticed, you know, from making videos, but also to talking to, you know, people, that almost nobody talks about this stuff. You know, these sort of videos don't get shared. So you've got, you know, that's what. So I like to compile all this knowledge and see the patterns, you know, and see where there's overlaps. So you've got the Book of Enoch, but you've also got the Book of Genesis and like the Tree of Knowledge. I think that it's quite likely the Tree of Knowledge is also about the written word. I mean, that's what a Tree of Knowledge is. It's like a library, right? That's how we think of a library. That's why we talk about branches of knowledge, you know, like history and chemistry and science and medicine and flower arranging. So all the branches are going to, you know, meet up and form the tree. So that's like the library. The Tree of Knowledge is a library. Well, at least in symbolic languages. So yeah, and the serpent is your like lizard brain, you know, that brain stem, the sort of the left brain reductionist, you know, this fits perfectly with the written word. You know, that's what the, you know, the language center is in your left side of your brain. So again, it's a mark of the beast because it's in your brain, your forehead, and your right hand. You know, where you write, people sign their name. You know, or they shake hands. This thing about shaking hands, I don't like shaking hands. I think there's something suspicious about it. You know, it says in the Bible, don't strike hands. It doesn't say don't shake hands, but you could interpret it as the same. You know. Or that thing people do like that, you know. It's like striking hands, isn't it? It says in the Bible to not strike hands, so you could imply that it's similar to shaking hands. You shouldn't shake hands. So yeah, you got like, so in the Bible, and then also you've got the book of Ecclesiastes, where he says in chapter 2, he says, this also is vanity. There is a man whose labor is in wisdom and knowledge and law. This also is vanity and a great evil. You know, and if you try talking to Christians about it, they've got this amazing ability to just not see what's written right in front of their face, and to sort of interpret it in a way that somehow doesn't make any sense at all. Like what they say generally, if you talk about this verse in Ecclesiastes, is this is talking about just what it sounds like it's talking about, right? It's just talking about a person that's who uses like whose labor is in wisdom and knowledge and equity and law. So somebody who deals with books like the Bible, which is, that's what it is. The Bible is a book, a compendium of written knowledge and wisdom and law. That's what the Bible is, right? Definitely in the Old Testament, but arguably the whole thing. This also is vanity and a great evil. So it's telling you that the Bible is a great evil, right? It's telling you there in plain language. But no, I've never heard any Christians talking about it, or identifying it with the written word, or the tree of knowledge being identified with the written word, or the mark of the beast. And yet they seem to be obviously what it's all about. And then if you look at the Book of Enoch, it makes it even more clear, irrefutable. And then if you think about Socrates, the grandfather of philosophy, obviously one of the wisest people to ever live, somebody who's had his feet on the ground and like his eyes in his head, so what did they do? They made him drink poison. Oh dear. It's like, I think a lot of it is when you're brought up and everyone around you is blind, in this sort of deliberate sort of self-sabotage kind of blind, that everyone else is encouraged to do, because people have been brought up like that for hundreds and hundreds of years. People just are like trained. They've got the truth right there in front of them in a book, but they're trained and conditioned to not see it and to misinterpret it. And I've got no real understanding of why this is, or how it happens, or how to reverse it, how to get people to snap out of it. It seems as though it's like a sort of natural, almost like a natural condition. It's as though somebody's tried to, this is what it appears like, somebody's tried to get this religion to sort of like for people, and they put a lot of effort into it and a lot of work, and yet the people just are behaving like sheep. There are no people, even though that they've got, they can do all kinds of interesting stuff. They can make nuclear bombs and mobile phones and airplanes and all kinds of interesting stuff that they can do. Cars that reach the speed of sound, although they're propelled by rockets, of course. Yeah, so I think part of doing the work is to understand this, just to get to grips with it, realize that these people are, I don't know, could easily just wake up if they chose to. For some reason they choose not to, and they just stay asleep, and whilst they're staying asleep, they are prone to be taken over by evil spirits, and could do all kinds of mischief, like how Agent Smith turns into, anyone can turn into Agent Smith in the Matrix. So yeah, it's like having this developing this awareness and consciousness of what's going on, seeing what's going on. Also, I'm talking about this also because I've been trying to get this idea across where you can do the work, but a child should be able to understand it, and I can explain it to a child. I think I'm sort of making some progress here with, this is how simple it is. It's really simple. You know, a child can understand it. You know, you've got like a natural herb, cannabis, that's been known to cure cancer for like 170 years, and like 70 years ago they started making it illegal everywhere. Maybe a bit longer than that. I think it was maybe 90 years ago in Canada. So they started making it illegal, and then the rates of cancer have gone up because a lot of people were using it like cannabis, so it was keeping things like cancer at bay. Also, it tends to keep your weight down. It tends to protect against things like diabetes. So things like diabetes and obesity have all gone up, and cancer. Since they've made cannabis illegal, there's people are getting more ill. There's more mental health problems, more depression. You know, and at the same time, you know, they brought compulsory dumbed down schooling in, you know, which also causes like severe mental health problems for people. And it seems that it also like anchors people in their left brain so that they get like tunnel vision. They're basically thinking with their lizard brain. So it's like it's the mark of the beast. You know, the written word is the mark of the beast. It's you can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast. Your credit card, which has all got the numbers and words and your signature on it. But more than that, you can't buy anything of significance like a house or some property or even an animal, you know, without having to sign your name, you know. So it's I mean, these things are so obvious, right? Why don't any of these Christians seem to notice any of this stuff? This is like to me, this is like treasure, right? This is where you get wisdom from and understanding. This is what it talks about in Proverbs. You know, understanding and wisdom is better than silver and gold. You know. You know, if you just stand in the truth and think about these things and think about why these people aren't seeing this stuff, and so that you can see that they're not people, they're not whole people, they're totally deluded. You know, they're basically blind to reality, completely blind to what's going on. Is it the written word? You know, is it the school system? Is it the government? You know, the sort of the threat of like you know, like the violence that the government will inflict on you. You know, because that's what they've done. They've basically trained people for hundreds or thousands of years through systematic violence. You know, if you don't do what the rulers want you to do, then they just get an army or a load of police to sort of beat you up or kill you, or burn you at the stake, you know, or crucify you or something. See, crucifixion was one of the ways that Rome used to get rid of any sort of political nuisances that they didn't want. You know, anyone talking about things they didn't like to be talked about, they would crucify him. It's the same with it's basically what they've done with Socrates. So they made him drink poison because he was talking about things that they didn't want him to talk about, right? So this is the story of Christ. I actually don't think there was a real Christ. I think what it really is it was, the religion was made like it was to appease a sort of all the shit that they've done. They crucified tens of thousands of people over so many years. And these people were people that just spoke the truth a lot of the time. They weren't necessarily real severe criminals. They're people like Christ who would have stood up against the money lenders, and because it was they created false money and stuff, and all kinds of unfair taxes and stuff, and only a certain amount of people had citizenship. Everyone else was basically lesser class people. They were basically like slaves. So people were being born into slavery. So I think the story of Christ is a way of like the Romans sort of creating a religion that would create a scapegoat. Well, on the one hand, but with the Jews as like the scapegoat, but also it's like a kind of an apology by them adopting the religion and taking it over, and saying that Christ was crucified, and it was God's plan. It makes it seem as though they're kind of apologizing. They're changing their ways. They're adopting this religion of this guy that got crucified by the Romans at the instigation of the Jews. It's like a kind of a belated apology for all the tens of thousands of people, basically innocent people that they crucified over years, decades or hundreds of years. It's like a way of trying to wash their hands, That's what I think it is anyway. Because they reckon that Jesus Christ was like an acronym or another name for Julius Caesar, who's also had the same initials, JC. I mean, there's some really quite interesting stuff. The way different people have interpreted the Bible and the New Testament. Cannabis is another possible identity for the Christ, considering that it's such a powerful healing herb. It cures cancer and stuff, and that it's prohibited. People don't like people in power don't like people to use cannabis because it makes them see more clearly. Makes them think more clearly. They're harder to deceive. People that use cannabis, they're not so easy to deceive as people that don't. They see through your bullshit. They see through your lies. So they don't like it. I'm going to draw this to a close anyway. This which wind? Do you mean like the wind that comes out of your arse? That kind of wind probably does control that kind of wind. So yeah, where's I going with this? Yeah, I'm going to draw it to a close now. Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking about like the crucifixion thing. Another thing, yeah, it's like it turned what it seems to have done is it's turned the whole idea of Christianity, like it, so that it doesn't work. There's this idea of the king killer, the king slayer, something that was like a tradition in ancient times. So when you have a king, there would be like a king for a year. I think they've done it in places like Greece. They'd have a king. The men would have a running race, right? And then whoever won the race would become king. And for maybe like a year, or it might have went for 4 years or 7 years or something, probably changed around a bit. But whoever won would be a king. And after his year was up, he would be killed. He'd be like have his head chopped off or something, you know. And so part of the way Christianity evolved was by absorbing all these different philosophies and mythologies from a whole load of other like groups of peoples and tying them all together to make a universal religion, the Catholic religion. You know, that's what Catholic means, universal. So it was designed like that. So it's very unlikely that there was an actual Christ, a real person who was a Christ, because the whole thing was a fabrication right from the beginning. That was the whole point of it. So that's why Christ is born at the you know, the equinox, you know, the beginning of the year, you know, because he's a sun god. You know, it's like the sun god is included into it, and so he's also the fisherman god, you know, because Isis was also a fisher person. Isis, the Egyptian goddess, told her 12 disciples who were fishermen to cast their nets on the other side of the boat, and they got a great big load of fish, exactly the same as Christ. You know, Isis also walked on the water, you know. Oh dear. So yeah, also they had there was a god called Isis in Northern Europe, where they used to use sacrifices, that they would sacrifice people by nailing them to a tree, you know, impaling them for, you know, putting nails through their hands and feet to a tree, and they would just leave them to die. So and then you had the, you know, the thing about the Kingslayer thing. So these things all fitted together, you know. The fact that you got Easter at the you know, at the beginning of the astrological year, beginning of Aries, the end of Pisces, beginning of Aries. Aries is the lamb, you know. Christ is the Lamb of God, you know. If the Pisces is a sign of the fish, and he was associated with fish and stuff. It's all too obviously a big scam, you know, a big hodgepodge of lies all mixed together, like a special brew, you know, to feed to the masses. You know, got something for everyone in there. Oh dear. So really, it's basically a sun cult, a sun worshipping cult, disguised in such a way to appeal to the masses. And most people think that it's all about it, you know, it's all about what it appears to be about, you know, and it obviously isn't. It's got all kinds of other things in there. That's why I think it's quite a valid. Okay, thanks, Patrick. I'm not a religious guy. I just talk about religions. I don't know what it means to be religious. So, you know, I'm more of a philosopher, really, I suppose. God is a human creation. Well, yeah. Okay. You probably didn't see the beginning of the video, but I was talking about how the Christians basically like devils walking around telling themselves that they're angels, because They don't do anything that Christ would do. You know, Christ, you know, turn the tables of the moneylenders over. So why aren't the Christians now talking about the banks ripping everyone off with their Federal Reserve and their fractional reserve banking system that's stealing 90% of everybody's money over the course of their lives? Why are they doing anything about cannabis that cures cancer? You know, Christ healed people on the Sabbath. That was against the law. So why are we allowing cannabis to be against the law when it cures cancer? If we were real Christians, we would give people cannabis, wouldn't we, to cure their cancer and their insomnia and their depression and their diabetes and their Parkinson's disease and stuff, you know. And why do we send children to school to be like traumatized for life when the Book of Enoch tells us that the written word is a great evil? There's no answer to these things. These people are just sheep, you know. They like calling themselves Christians. I expect devils would like to call themselves angels, you know, just in the same way. Yeah, I don't really know much about Antifa, but I've heard a lot of like people talking about it as if they're a bunch of like kind of freaks, which they probably are. Anyway, so I'm going to end it now, this video. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for your comments, Patrick. Bye.